Good afternoon. Welcome to Paraspar Talk, organized by the Office of Communication, Indian Institute of Science. We are glad that we are closing this year's talks with a very special speaker, Dr. S. Natesh, who will speak on his brilliant book, Iconic Trees of India. Before we begin, I'll give a small introduction of the speaker today. Dr. Natesh worked with the Department of Biotechnology, Government of India, for nearly 3 decades and retired as senior advisor in 2012. A botanist by training, he taught botany at the University of Delhi for over 9 years before moving to the government in 1984. In DBT, he headed several divisions including bioresources, medicinal and aromatic plant, environmental biotechnology, food biotechnology, aquaculture and marine biotechnology, and biotechnology for societal development. He was also the first member secretary of the National Bioresource Development Board. He headed the International Collaboration Division for nearly 8 years and was the editor-in-chief of DBT's bi-monthly newsletter, Biotech News. Through his leadership, a number of new and novel programs were successfully launched: the digitized inventories of bioresources of India, quantitative estimates of the plant resources in the Western and Eastern Ghats, a butterfly park for breeding and conservation of butterflies of Peninsular India at Banarghata, 4 rural bioresource complexes, and 5 gene banks for conservation of medicinal and aromatic plants. Dr. Natesh provided a new direction, leadership, and impetus for international collaboration in DBT. He has received the Biospectrum Lifetime Achievement Award for his contribution towards taking Indian bioscience sector to new heights. A new plant species, Aponigeton nateshi, has been named in his honor. Currently, he is an honorary fellow at the Ashoka Trust of Research in Ecology and Environment. We are very thankful that you have agreed for this talk, and we invite you to deliver your talk.
Good evening to all of you. I'm particularly glad that Professor Gadekar, Mrs. Gadekar, and Dr. Usha are here. Many other friends, Namrata is here. Thank you very much for coming. This is a topic on which I have written recently, and let me start my talk by saying that it's a great honor to be here. So thank you. Let me first talk about trees in general, and then I'll come back to iconic trees. As per 2015 estimates, the Earth is supposed to have 3 trillion trees, which is better than, or 7 times, better than the estimation that was made earlier. But before we celebrate, 15 billion trees are cut down every year, and if this continues, by 2050, the world tree number would have fallen to just 2 trillion. And Indian figures for this tree numbers is 35 billion. So, if you looked at how many trees each of us has, the world average is 422 trees for every person. Canada, for example, has 10,163 trees per person. Compared to that, India has just 28 trees per person. And in between, you have a whole range from Greenland to UK, which has 47, and China has 130 trees per person. So, depends on the number of people and the country, and this is something we should really look at very seriously. I don't have to tell you why trees are important. They are important from ecological, economic, and cultural perspectives. All kinds of things we derive from them, including food, fiber, timber, drugs, etc., paper, many other things. They also combat climate change, clean up the air, shield us from UV light. They cool our towns, cities, conserve water, mitigate pollution, soil erosion. They provide canopy and habitat for wildlife. Mark seasons, they herald the arrival of spring and winter and autumn and so on and so forth. Beautify spaces, lend scenic and aesthetic value, increase the worth of property. Just consider what wonderful tools they make for understanding basic biological phenomena. Just look at aging, for example. Trees have such long life. We could learn from about how do they manage to do that. How do they stand in the same place for 100 years, hundreds of years, some even thousands of years. So what is it that they have which we lack? Or can we, although it's not a great idea to find a gene and put it into human beings and live for 100 years or 300 years, but we should learn about what that phenomenon is. Older and larger trees are even more important than younger and smaller trees because they sequester disproportionately large amounts of carbon compared to smaller trees. They also act as proxies for past climates. The past climatic data is hidden in the rings of the trees, growth rings of the trees. And if we know how to read those, we can understand and learn what a climate was, particular climate was in, say, 1836 or 1520 or whatever. And then see if there is any pattern of predictability for future. Can we predict droughts? Can we predict floods? Can we predict insect attacks or whatever? Therefore, they are living records of environmental history. Then they are important from historical and cultural perspective too, and thus they are focal points for local traditions. Evidence of long relationship between people and places, full of memories, events, emotions and myths. Because they stay for so long, hundreds of years, they make a bridge between us and our past and history. And therefore we feel as if we are connected to the events of the past. They are also magnets for tourists and pilgrims, and thus ambassadors of ecotourism. If you looked at developed economies, they show a lot of interest in exceptional trees. In India, we don't really value exceptional trees, nor do we record them, or we have data on them. But in many of the developed economies, there is so much interest in special trees. They call them champion trees, remarkable trees, special trees, exceptional trees, and so on and so forth. This interest is fueled through attractive books. You must have read Meetings with Remarkable Trees by Pakenham, Tree Story by Valerie Trouet, many others. One can cite beautifully illustrated books or those that narrate stories about trees, scientific stories about trees, and in a fascinating way. Also citizen science projects, for example, champion tree listings. Large number of people, the public participates in these listings. The public, civil society members recommend exceptional trees to be included in the registers or champion tree registers, and an expert committee will vet those and then incorporate that or reject it. And these registers are actually renewed periodically, and these are all digitized registers. So today, if you say this is the oldest tree in a given place, maybe tomorrow there may be an older tree or a taller tree or a larger tree or a more historical tree, and so on and so forth. So they also organize canopy walks, ecotourism. Even Singapore organizes canopy walks. Europe, there are many places which organize canopy walks and ecotourism and so on and so forth. So these champion tree registers are in various countries of Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the European Union. Even countries like Singapore, Vietnam, South Africa have programs on heritage trees. And I don't think we have even begun to have a discussion on our heritage trees in India, nor do we agree upon what constitutes an iconic tree or a heritage tree. What should be the characteristic traits which we should agree upon at a national level to constitute programs around which protection, conservation could move. When there is not enough information, there is no action either. And, our culture may be very ancient, but we don't have meticulous records of remarkable trees. And while there are books and papers written on species that are associated with gods, saints, and so on, individual tree champions are rarely identified. Even if you look at our floras, they will talk about ficus as a genus or a ficus religiosa as a species. But how many individual trees stand out in a forest area or in an urban setting or in a rural setting? This is not generally recorded at all. So certain trees attract tourists and pilgrims. For example, I think most of us would have heard of the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya, Hindus, Buddhists, and so on. I'm sure many of you might have even be aware of the great banyan tree in Kolkata. But an average Indian, if you ask him or her, how many iconic trees do you know? I think the number of trees they can count will be, one hand would be enough, or probably not even required. So that is the state of affairs. They are not known outside their village or region or state, let alone the rest of the country. There are also competing claims for the largest or the oldest trees, mainly conducted through the media, and this has no scientific basis, mostly guesswork. If you go to any place in India, especially religious places, and ask, how old is this tree? They'll say, sir, 5,000 saal to hoga. 5,000 seems to be some kind of a benchmark for old trees in our temples or gurdwaras or dargahs or wherever you go. So that is based on some wild, imagined, calculations of things. Meanwhile, agriculture, deforestation, urbanization, and climate change are taking heavy toll on our trees. Delhi has a great record of sacrificing 3 trees per hour. This was admitted in a writ petition by the Delhi government one of these days. I'm sure this is true of Karnataka, this is true of Maharashtra, this is true of Goa and everywhere else. Widening of National Highway 59 in Odisha's Ganjam district sacrificed 1,700 odd trees. The Delhi-Dehradun Expressway took a toll of 2,500 British-era salt trees. You know about the RA forest in Mumbai. The Minister for Environment, Forests and Climate Change admitted in a parliament question that during the 4 years between 2015 and 19, his ministry gave permission to nearly 11 million trees to be destroyed for various development projects across the country. And now there is this great Nicobar project in which I understand that the official figures are 1 lakh trees, but according to calculations by other experts, it could be as many as 3 lakh trees. So we are in for a lot of trouble, and one needs to think about how do we go about saving these. So when there is no information, as I said, there is hardly any monitoring. Recently, there was a study conducted published in May 2024, which looked at our farmland trees. And it is, they looked at some 0.6 billion farmland trees and tracked them over the past decade. The first study of its kind where such a huge number of trees were looked at in one go. It looks like that 11% of our large trees mapped between 2010 and 11 disappeared by 2018. And then between 2018 and 22, more than 5 million large farmland trees vanished. What is the main reason for this? Partly the altered cultivation practices that seems to now people think the trees within fields are perceived as detrimental to crop yields. So there could be perceived problem, there could be real problems, but whatever it is, there is large scale erosion taking place. So I'm not going to concentrate on trees in general, but I want to talk about certain special trees which are remarkable for some reason. So when I say iconic trees, what are they? They are individual trees with remarkable qualities. If you look at literature, there are some 60 terms used to describe them. Remarkable trees, champion trees, heritage trees, iconic trees, special trees, and so on and so forth. But in each of these definitions, the central meaning is the same. That is, individual trees that stand out in some exceptional, extraordinary, and uncommon manner and are recognized by local communities, but largely unknown outside the village, state, or region. You may be awed by an iconic tree. You may be absolutely, you may be speechless in front of that. You may be wonderstruck, but rarely will you be left unmoved. So that would be one way of looking at an iconic tree. So wherever they are, such tree champions are a priceless national resource to be treasured, nurtured, protected, and then handed over to the next generation for safekeeping. So for the purpose of discussion, I have categorized these iconic trees under the following 6 headings. There could be more, there could be less, depending upon various things. So one could be age. And this is something which foresters and others look at as the primary method of looking at trees, which are plus trees and so on. So ancient specimens that have survived a long age. Champions and giants having record dimensions is the second category. Trees with huge size and so on and so forth. They may be large, they may be having a huge canopy, they could be large area in terms of the size and so on and so forth. The third would be trees of historical importance, which means that they are linked to important events, personalities, places, or even periods. Botanical oddballs, which could be rarities, interesting introductions, or having features of special botanical interest. Trees of indigenous religious significance or cultural importance. I have plenty of them in this country. And I have even included collections of trees such as avenues and groves. Sacred groves you are all familiar with, but there are other kinds of groves. For example, the earliest teak plantation in India, or the earliest cinchona plantation in India, or there are groves established by the Mughals like Shah Jahan and Jahangir in Kashmir and other places in India. So some remnants of those are still living and thriving. So even those I have included in this work. So my work basically celebrates iconic trees from across India. There are many ways of coming at climate change and deforestation and degradation and so on and so forth. But of course, planting new trees is a solution, but preserving what we have, I think, is even more important, and that's why I say we must celebrate what we have. And therefore, I have tried to link individual trees to botany, history, culture, and people. And from a whole list of, a starting list of some 300 to 350 individual trees which could have potential iconic value, I selected some 75 trees, and these could be gnarled, age-wizened patriarchs, those that remind us of historic events and personalities, gentle wish-fulfilling giants, those that bring back memories of gory deaths and dark punishments, and many others. Early on, I decided that I would not be writing on any tree which I have not personally seen or visited and discussed with the communities in which they are embedded. So I have seen all these 75 trees except for 3 which I couldn't visit because of logistics and COVID and so on and so forth, but the rest of them I have seen. This work resulted in a book which has been published by Rowley Books just about 2-3 months ago, August 2024. So hopefully this will encourage preparation of district, state and national level heritage registers, and even before that a consensus on what we must call iconic heritage trees. Stimulate more studies on linking trees to science, people, history and culture. Inspire public participation in nominating heritage trees and then protecting them, and create better awareness of tree protection. Awareness leads to appreciation, appreciation leads to ownership, ownership leads to conservation and protection, and then safekeeping. So I think they are all interlinked, and therefore I hope this is a small way this book will actually result in at least some of these. So I'll now give some examples of trees. Let's start with the oldest trees in this country. I have made a whole list of the scientifically confirmed oldest trees in this country, and I'm going to show you only one example from each category here for want of time. So the oldest scientifically certified oldest tree is what is known as the Himalayan pencil cedar, botanically Juniperus polycarpus. Before we say this, how do we actually determine the age of these trees scientifically? There are basically two methods. The predominantly used method and most accurate method is, of course, what we call dendrochronology, through which you take a core sample of the wood. You don't have to cut down the tree, you don't have to seriously injure the tree. There is this, you can see this, this person is using a borer, and he inserts that borer into the trunk of the tree at breast height, usually 130 centimeters, and then you bring out a small cylinder less than the diameter of a pencil. You take this to the lab, you dry it, you sandpaper it, and you get a flat surface, and then you get the rings seen on that. And if you start from counting the ring from the outer surface that is nearest to the bark and go progressively inward towards the pith, the outermost is the latest ring that has been formed. That is 2024 if you have cut the tree, sampled the tree just after the growth season of 24. So then 23, 21, 22 like that go down, and depending upon if you reach the pith, you get the whole number of rings, and therefore you can assign each ring a particular calendar year. And so this is the best method because each ring can correspond to a calendar year, and then there are computer softwares these days available. The second important thing that you will notice is that the rings here are not of the same diameter or the same width. And look at this ring, for example, in this specimen. This ring is wide, this is reasonably wide, but there are some narrow rings like this. So the larger or the larger growth rings were formed when the growing conditions were very congenial, and the narrower growth rings corresponded with those years when the growing was very hard because of some stresses. It may be abiotic or biotic stress. So knowing exactly which year there were stresses, which year there were good congenial conditions, you can also determine the climate. All the rings in a given area of trees on that area will be similar. So you have a ring signature, and you can compare different trees and then assign rings to all of them, and this way you can build up a whole chronology. And people have built up chronologies for 15, 13 and 20,000 years now in Europe and USA using such methods. You can also use wood from ancient beams or timber that has been lying around for ages and so on. You can cross-match these living tree rings with those from those, and you can extend the chronology as long as you practically can. So by this method, The oldest tree so far known in India is this Himalayan pencil cedar or juniperus, I told you, polycarpus, which grows in the arid regions of northwestern Himalaya, extends from Himachal Pradesh right up to Kumaon in Uttarakhand. And this tree, when sampled, when it was sampled, it was 2023 years old. And today it may be 2040 years, something like that. And it grows in those arid regions, cold and drought-hardy species. The samples were taken from Keelong in Lahul Spiti, Himachal Pradesh. And they are not spectacularly large trees, as you can see, because they are affected by dieback disease. They are also affected by other problems, crown dieback, and they have barks which strip prominently. So moving on, there are many champions with exceptional dimensions, exceptional record dimensions. One of the world records that we have is we have in India the largest tree on this planet. And this is a banyan tree, which is in Andhra Pradesh in a place called Guti Bailu. And this is a banyan tree, and it's one single tree which forms a kind of mini forest. And it occupies, actually it got the Guinness Book of World Records, it was included in 1989. The assessment is based on two-dimensional canopy coverage area done through Google Maps. They studied 18 large banyan trees from across the world, and this emerged as the world's largest banyan that has been studied. It has a net canopy area, leaving apart the gaps between the canopy. If you take that out and use the net canopy area, it covers 19,107 square meters, which basically is close to 2 acres of land. And it equals something like 2.7 football fields, and 20,000 people can perhaps stand under this tree. The local legend says there was a lady in the early 15th century known as Timmamma, and she was a very devout wife, and her husband was not very healthy, and she looked after him. When he passed away, she jumped onto his funeral pyre to commit sati. And when people were watching this, one of the branches of the banyan tree started becoming green and sprouted, buds and leaves. And legend says from that tree, branch, this tree has grown to such huge proportions. Today, Timmamma is considered an incarnation of God. There is a shrine built for her under that tree. And on Mahashivratri day every year, they have a little gathering of people. And then, the shrine, I have shown it here. There is a regular priest there, and people go there. A childless couple go there and seek blessings for having children. And while I was there, some couple had come there to say thanks for having gotten a child. So it all depends on what you believe and how much you believe, and so on and so forth. So whatever keeps it healthy and happy is, I think, something. So examples of trees of historical significance, there could be many, because several trees are, connected to personalities like emperors, Mughals, British people, kings, and villains, and so on and so forth. So there are trees which bring back happy memories. For example, this Raja of Jammu, the first Raja of Jammu was Gulab Singh, his Raj Tilak ceremony was occurred under a Putranjiva tree in a place called Akhnur near Jammu. They didn't choose a hall or the palace, but he was anointed under a Putranjiva tree. And unfortunately, the tree died in a flood about 20 years ago. It's no longer there, but there is that ghat, which is called the Putranjiva Ghat, and so on and so forth. So there are others. I'm going to show you one example of a tree of historical significance. I chose this tree because this tree is connected in many ways to this institute as well, and therefore I thought it may be of greater interest to you. Sir C.V. Raman's Primavera tree, it stood there in the Raman Research Institute. It's a rare but stunningly beautiful tree. It originates, it's native to Central and South America. And Primavera in Spanish means early spring, which means when this tree starts flowering, it's spectacularly beautiful in the forests. And people know that spring cannot be far behind when this tree flowers gregariously all over the hills of Central and South America. And we don't have too many trees in India, and they planted this in Raman Research Institute to as a memorial to Sir C.V. Raman. In a rare show of respect, the Karnataka government permitted the cremation of Sir C.V. Raman on the premises of the Raman Research Institute. It appears that when he became ill shortly before his 82nd birthday, he was hospitalized. The doctor gave him just 4 hours to live, but he survived and continued to live. And then after some days, his caregivers thought he should be brought back to his home in the Raman Research Institute. And Raman was known to be a great lover of gardens and plants and flowers. There are some 168 varieties of roses which he bred and personally took care of. It's still there on the campus. And he enjoyed showing off his garden and plants to school children, college students, and so on and so forth. So when he was brought back virtually on his deathbed, he was very disappointed that the garden was not visible to him from his window. So he said, if I had known that I couldn't even see my garden, I should have, lowered the windows a bit if I had known this earlier. So his caregivers actually raised his cot to a little height, and then the garden became visible to him. And the death came sometime into 1970. And as a mark of respect, they said there could be no better monument to his memory than to plant a beautiful tree in the place where he was cremated. So a committee was constituted, and on that committee there was Dr. Nalini Dhawan as a member. And Dr. Nalini Dhawan, as you all know, was the wife of Dr. Dhawan, who was the director of this institute at that time. And she was also a very great lover of, plants, gardens, landscaping, and so on. Her father, Bhavani Shankar Nirodi, was a well-known horticulturist, and he had contributed significantly to the beauty of this campus, I understand. And he had also contributed to several gardens across India, including the Telco garden at Pune and Jamshedpur and many other places. So when Nalini was on the committee, and they suggested, please tell us a plant which you should actually place here as a memory, in memory of Sir C.V. Raman, they started scouting for a suitable, appropriate plant. And then I understand that it was Mr. Bhavani Shankar Nirodi who suggested that here is a spectacular plant, which is as spectacular as Sir C.V. Raman's life. So I think you should plant that here. So then they started scouting for it, and they found a few plants in Pune, in the Telco, and in Jamshedpur. And they agreed to part with it. And 3 seedlings were brought from Pune to Indian Institute of Science. This plant, as I said, is a native of Central and South America, and a plant coming from 17,000 to 20,000 kilometers across as the crow flies. Nobody knew how it would perform in the alien climate of Bangalore. So Nalini said, I will look after it, acclimatize it. And for nearly 4 years, it sat in her garden under her loving care. And then in 1974, they planted it in the place where Raman was cremated. And then for the next 18 years, it didn't flower. It kept growing and growing, increased in size spectacularly, as you can see from the background how fastly it grew, but didn't flower at all. So everybody was waiting with bated breath, and finally in 1988, something like 14 years after it was actually planted on the ground, it flowered. And how? It was so spectacularly beautiful. But the flowering did not take place annually, year after year, but it would sporadically flower. And in 2020, there was a fungal attack and termite attacks, and they invited a specialist from the agriculture university to minister to the tree, and then it was nursed back into health. But unfortunately, in 2022, you had very unforeseen floods, which were so heavy, and the tree collapsed and died. And it is no longer there. Now I understand they have planted an Ashoka tree, Saraka Ashoka, which was called Sita Ashok otherwise, in its place right now. So this is one historic tree which is no longer with us. Just to point out that there is a honeybee hive there, a sign of its acceptance, as I think, Apis dorsata, the giant honeybee, making a hive on that tree. One single one you can see there on the left-hand side of the picture. So another example, I wonder if I have enough time. Maybe I will just go through very quickly. There's another historic tree. This is actually what is called a weeping cypress. This is in Sikkim, in a place called Yoksam. And this is on the western side of Sikkim, western district of Sikkim province. And there is a spectacular tree that stands behind a stone edifice. Now this is actually a stone throne, and this was used as a throne for coronating the first Chogyal of Sikkim. And the story goes that sometime in the early 17th century, there was a lot of religious purgings going on in Tibetan Buddhism scene, and the red hat lamas were persecuted. One of them, called Lama Latsen Chembo, he fled Tibet and came south to what is today known as Norbogang in Sikkim. Sikkim did not exist as a country then. It was just one of those provinces which was south of Tibet for the Lama. And at that place in Norbogang, he was joined by two other lamas who had also fled Tibet, and they were in search of a suitable place to settle down. And they started having a parley, and the purpose of that was, how can we establish a Buddhist kingdom in this God-forsaken area? That was their topic of discussion. They said, we need a local guy here. Most of them were Lepchas at that time. How do we convert the Lepchas into Buddhism and make sure that there is a monarchy here which, protects Buddhism and preserves it? So they started searching, and they found a guy in the eastern part of today's Sikkim, which is close to Gangtok, a man called Phuntsog Nomgyal. And he was a very influential leader in his area. And when they started talking to him, he said, yes, I am willing to, perpetuate Buddhism here if you make me the monarch. And so an agreement was struck. And they said, okay, we will make you the monarch, both the temporal and religious head. And we call you Chogyal. And in one day, an auspicious day in 1641, they coronated this Phuntsog Namgyal. And the chief lama was Latsen Chembo. And you see here 4 thrones, 4 seats. And this is where Latsen Chembo, sat. And this is where the Chogyal sat. And the 2 other lamas sat on this. This is a stone throne which was used for coronating them. And the story goes that Lama Latsen Chembo then took his walking stick and buried it behind the stone throne. And that went and became this huge tree. And today it stands so majestically there, close to some 400 years. It's a spectacularly beautiful place. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site today, Kanchenjunga Jonga Wildlife Sanctuary. So this is the story of this weeping cypress, which is over 400 years old and still stands there, breathing and carrying on its life. So there is a third example I wanted to give of a peepal tree, which stands in the central clock tower area of Dehradun. And this tree has always been looked at as a pest and an eyesore, because they think that this clock tower is the representative of this is the representative of Dehradun, or the spirit of Dehradun. And this clock tower, the foundation of this was laid in 1948 by the then governor of the central provinces, Sarojini Naidu. And the clock tower was inaugurated in 1953 by Lal Bahadur Shastri, who was the minister in the center at that time. So they wanted to beautify this clock tower, and therefore they wanted to eradicate the tree. And from time to time, the local governments have been saying that this tree is an eyesore. It is actually damaging the foundations of this clock tower. We must either remove it or we must eradicate it, and so on and so forth. But the public have been putting up a strong resistance to this, because they have seen enough so-called development projects by the government which are more of an eyesore than what things were before they started meddling with it. So they say, no, this tree is as important as the clock tower, because they believe that Sarojini Naidu also planted this tree when she laid the foundation of the clock tower. So they say this is as much part of the heritage of Dehradun as the clock tower is, and why should you remove this? So one day in 2015, a local group called Citizens for Green Dune dressed up in the best fineries and went and started worshipping this tree and tied rakhis around this tree. And from morning to night, hundreds of these volunteers came and started, tying rakhis around this tree. Made a huge media splash. And then a reluctant government finally had to admit that there is so much resistance to removing this tree. So finally, the renovation of that clock tower was carried out without removing the tree. And now the idea of dropping this tree from their program of eradication or shifting is assured. So thanks to this vigilant civic movement, the tree is still standing there. The second question was, when I looked at this tree, if it was actually planted by Sarojini Naidu, it must be about 72, 73, 74 years old now. It looked much larger to be that young. So I thought this tree must have been standing there when Sarojini Naidu actually laid the foundation of the clock tower. So I started digging around and I started asking all the older people in Dehradun, have you ever seen this tree even before Sarojini Naidu came there? Are there any literature? The municipal records exist to show where the Dehradun clock tower was built. And it took me some 4 or 5 months. Then I located a photograph purportedly taken in 1881, and I could not establish that it was taken in 1881, but it showed the fact that the tree did exist in that place much before the clock tower came up. And there was a tonga stand, and there were 2 water tanks also in that area. So I could make out that the tree definitely was there before, but how long before? So I started asking all the older citizens of Dehradun, and finally Mr. Ruskin Bond confirmed to me that the tree did exist when he was a young boy and moving around in Dehradun. So if this is correct, the tree is much more of a heritage than the clock tower can ever aspire to be. And therefore, I am very glad that the citizens preserved it and saved it. I tried to put this example for two reasons. One, to show you how built heritage is so much more valued than living, breathing heritage in this country. I can cite dozens of examples for this. Secondly, how a very strong civic movement can actually save the day for some of our heritage trees. So now coming to another example of a tree which was used as an execution tree by the Adil Shah dynasty in Bijapur. Now there was this African baobab which has come, it's now proved that all the African baobabs in India have come from outside. None of them is native to India. People have done DNA fingerprinting studies of the baobabs on the eastern coast of Africa and the western coast of India and other parts of India. And all the provenances that we have come through the Indian Ocean trade into this place. Strange though that in Lucknow, in a place called Barabanki, they worship one such baobab tree as the Parijat. Normally, Parijat is Nyctanthus arbotristis, which is widely accepted by both botanists and traditionally those who worship trees, but in that place they consider that as the Parijat tree. And they consider that the tree is 5,000 years old. And thirdly, our Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, when the foundation for the temple in Ayodhya was done, he also planted this tree as a Parijat tree. But here in Bijapur, it is not worshipped. This was used as a tree under which people, criminals and enemies of the state were executed or beheaded or hanged from it. And it must have been at least 400, 500 years old when I saw it in 2014. The picture, the upper picture is mine, and the lower two pictures are taken from the Hindu. Unfortunately, after I visited and wrote about this tree, it collapsed and died very suddenly. There are papers now which are, Nature had a paper on this, PNAS has papers on this. The world's largest baobab trees are all dying all of a sudden in the last few years. And they have blamed climate change for it, whatever that means. But nobody knows the exact cause for their deaths. And they have not accounted for this particular tree, but world over, they have selected many other trees and demonstrated that the baobabs, the old and large baobabs, are all dying. So this tree has another interesting thing. There is a man called Meadows Taylor, Philip Meadows Taylor, and this guy was he was a polymath. He served under the Nizam of Hyderabad. He was a Britisher who never served the East India Company, but he worked under the Nizam. He was a polymath. He was an administrator. He has done many good things in the Hyderabad area and Andhra Pradesh area. He also was a military man. He was also a man of letters. His first novel was called Confessions of a Thug. And this became a fantastically popular book. And it was so popular that the galley prose were directly taken to Victoria. Queen Victoria was very young then, because she wanted to read them before anybody else. So it was that popular. And his third novel, I think, was a novel called Tara. And this is a Tara, a Maratha tale. And this novel was written in 1863. And it is written it's a romantic novel in the background of the rise of the Maratha Empire and the decline of the Adil Shahi Empire. And in that background, the story is so beautiful. I highly recommend this book to any one of you who have not read it. And in that book, Philip Meadows Taylor mentions this tree no less than 16 times. And later, this Theodore Cook, in his Flora of the Bombay Presidency, says, this is the tree which Philip Meadows Taylor has mentioned in his book Tara. So it's a confirmation of the identity of the tree by T. Cook. So this is, unfortunately, it is no longer there. It collapsed about, 2015. So just to give you this example of a plant which is culturally important to the Nagas. This is a plant this is a fig, which is called a white fig tree. It grows in a small village called Makhel in the Senapati district of Manipur, which is the northernmost district of Manipur. And this is very important to the Nagas because the primeval Naga mother sat under this tree, and it traces the origin of all the Nagas to this primeval mother. And the story goes that she was resting under this tree one day, and then suddenly she was enveloped by clouds. And the clouds impregnated her, and she begot 3 offspring. And there were 3 sons, in fact. The first one was a tiger, representing all the wild animal kingdom. The second one was a celestial person who was representing the heavens. And the third one was a human being. So because all the Nagas originated through clouds, Nagas are also called the cloud people. And so these 3 sons, when this lady grew old, she asked them to look after her. The firstborn son, who was the tiger, was always very harsh to her. He would always tell her, when you are dead, I will eat your arm, I will eat your limb, I will eat your leg, I will eat, She was always getting terrified of this guy. The second born son was basically an indifferent fellow. He would not help her, he would not do anything to her. So she was always very happy with the third born, the youngest human being, who was her son. And when she finally died, there was a lot of bickering between the 3 siblings on who should inherit the home and the hearth. And after some disagreement, it was agreed that the godly person should go to the spaces and occupy the atmosphere. The tiger should go to the wilderness and occupy there. And therefore, the home came to the human being. So the tradition among many Nagas today is that the youngest son inherits the property from the mother. So this tree is still standing in this village called Makhel in Manipur. And we don't know where the Nagas actually came from. There are many prevailing theories about that. The absence of written records also makes it possible for many theories to perpetuate. But according to one theory, which seems to be gaining traction these days, they seem to have come from the Indonesia, Thailand, through the Indo-Myanmar route, and they congregated in Makhel. And this constituted a large number of tribes, which were not differently named at that time. They're all called Nagas. And when their numbers became too large, then they dispersed to various places and started calling themselves Ao, Mao, Chekesang, and many other tribes. So for Nagas, Makhel is a very important place because that is where the original settlement happened, and from where they dispersed. And this tree stands there as a testimony to their culture. And so these are other pictures of the tree. Incidentally, this is the chief's hut standing next to the tree. This belongs to a Mao. Current director of Botanical Survey of India is one Mao, and if he was not the director, he should have been the chief here, performing all the cultural, religious rites. So I will skip this one and go to this botanical curiosities. And there is this tree which stands in a place called Yarika, very close to Gulmarg. In 13 kilometers earlier, you get a small place called Tangmarg. And near Tangmarg, just 2 kilometers from Tangmarg, is this Yarika. In this place, in this small village, you have a field station of the Indian Institute of Integrative Medicine, a CSIR institute, which is headquartered in Jammu. And in this field station, you come into the presence of a very imposing tree, which is this giant sequoia. For those of you who are not familiar with giant sequoia, I don't think anybody is, they represent the largest tree species with the greatest volume in terms of mass. The most famous tree of this giant sequoia is nicknamed as General Sherman, named after the Civil War American hero, and it has the largest known volume of wood of the trunk, not counting the roots nor the branches. So it is such a tree which is very unique and entirely endemic to the mountains of the Western California. It grows at very high altitudes. So what is such a tree which is so endemic, and one tree doing in this place which is in the middle of nowhere in Yarika? How did it come there? So if you looked at this tree, it's today about 80 to 90 years old. It was discovered in 1975 by a Dr. D.L. Dhar, who was then teaching in the University of Kashmir in Srinagar. He went on a field trip and looked at this tree, published a paper in the Indian Forester, and nobody looked at it after that. And today it is about 25 meters tall with a trunk girth of 5.85, nearly 6 meters circumference. And the bark is very spongy characteristically. It does produce cones. It produces pollen cones and seed cones, but nobody has ever seen a seedling underneath the tree in all these years. Today it is close to 100 years and it cannot reproduce. Possibility could be not enough pollen is being produced for pollination, or the seeds, the ovules may be infertile, or in their native habitat, such giant sequoias require fire to propagate. So that facility doesn't exist in Yarika. So whatever the reason may be, this is absolutely the only tree, and I call this the loneliest tree in India. And it is actually, you can't help feeling very sorry for this tree. Brought millions of, thousands of kilometers away from its homeland, planted in the middle of nowhere, forgotten by those who were responsible for its journey, devoid of any kins, and unable to reproduce, and stuck in the middle of this Yarika where nobody goes and nobody knows about it outside. I was really feeling very sorry. There is a small compensation, however, that the Institute got 2 large paintings of this tree made, and one hangs in the headquarters of the Indian Institute of Integrated Medicine in Jammu. The other is in the Central Drug Research Institute in Lucknow. These paintings were made by a local Jammu artist, a very famous one called K.K. Gandhi. So this is the only tree in India, single tree, and possibly my suspicion is the only tree in the entire South Asia. I have not heard of this thing being known in any other part. Now coming to one example of groves. Very close to you here, near the Bangalore airport, there is a tamarind grove which traces its origin to the Chola dynasty and 13th century. And there are several tamarind trees here. Some of them are spectacularly beautiful. 14 of them are very old, and at least 3-4 of them are over 400 years old. It is said that they did carbon dating of those trees, and they are older than 400 years. And they're so beautifully gnarled, and one of them actually, was struck by a lightning, and it split into 2, and both of them are still surviving. And they produce these coppices, and smaller trunks come up from the ground around them. And the story goes that the local king at that time was a man who had a very beautiful daughter. And this daughter fell in love with a neighborly prince. And when the prince offered to marry this daughter, the king refused, saying that you are not good enough to marry my daughter. But unbeknown to him, the daughter secretly loved him. And when he attacked the fort, she showed him the way to enter the fort. So the king panicked And he collected all his jewelry and gold and everything and put them along with lots of tamarind seeds and buried them in the ground. And they say that is how this tope, mango tope, grew up. Whatever be the story, but it's very fascinating. But many of them are so old, 400 years old actually. And this is something that the Karnataka Biodiversity Board has declared as a heritage site. But beyond declaring the board and putting a board there, there is nothing there. There's not even a fencing around it. And so it's practically meaningless to just put a board to preserve it. Anybody can go there and, it's happening actually. So I think that was the last slide I had. I have just tried to show that why iconic trees are important. We have so many of them in this country. I've just given you a glimpse and flavor of what this country has. And I have selected just 75 of them in my book, but there are so many hundreds of them waiting to be discovered. And if you connect them to, the botany, to people, history, culture, it becomes so much more fascinating. And through that knowledge, we will come to appreciate them and eventually preserve them, protect them, and pass them on. It will also go a long way in mitigating the climate change. And I hope some of you get interested enough to look for more trees or find more trees and look for them and love them. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
So, thank you for your wonderful talk. I want to talk a little about not the living treasures, but the afterlife of them. Many of these trees get chopped down. For instance, there's one eucalyptus that was growing next to Tipu's summer palace, which is supposed to be about 200 years old. And it was chopped down because it was threatening one of the structures. So after we saw the stump, I persuaded various people to at least take a slice and put it somewhere for posterity. And it seems like very few institutions have any provision for long-term archival of slices of trees. So what would be your thoughts on that?
Actually, I have covered the tree in my book, the one that you mentioned, the Tipu's. Tipu Sultan was the first person in this country to import eucalyptus and introduce eucalyptus to this country. And it was done around 1790, it is believed, because thereafter he became too engrossed with battles with the British and eventually died in 1799. The amazing thing is he introduced 16 species of eucalyptus to Nandi Hills. All of them are there. And that was identified much later by in independent India. Until then, nobody had tried to identify them either. They sent them all to Kew and got them all identified. Turns out there are 16 species that he introduced. And there are many hybrids between those species that Karnataka government used in its forestry plantation. At one time, Karnataka used to supply eucalyptus seeds all over the country to forestry programs. Of course, eucalyptus has a very checkered history. There are those who love it, those who hate it, and all that. We need not go into that aspect. But historically, it is a very great legacy that Nandi Hill holds. Now, the very people that were supposed to protect those trees were the ones who actually killed those trees. Because there were two trees which were leaning towards a guest house, which was occasionally used by Tipu Sultan as a resting place for him. And even before that, Karnataka newspapers like Deccan Herald, The Hindu have been highlighting how dilapidated that Tipu's guest house is, and that if you go there you need a bath because nobody cleans it, and it's all crumbling down. So why is it more important than a living heritage? So this is another example of how built heritage is more valued, even by those who should know better than living heritage. Yes, you're right. When I went there, they had just chopped those trees. I have pictures of those showing 3 trees that were being cut at that time. December, sometime like this, I was there. So Lal Bagh has started doing that kind of thing now. Some of their old trees, they are now taking it to one part of the garden and they are making some sculptures out of those trunks and they are displaying them with their, this was this tree. For example, there were 3 trees of mango, which were of Tipu's vintage, they say. And 2 of them have disappeared now. 1 is still standing. The second tree, when they died, they took it to this part near the glass house or behind the glass house. They have an area where they're actually preserving such trees, and they have invited renowned artists to make things out of those, and they are putting labels on them. That's a good thing, I thought. In other places like near Trivandrum, there is a temple built for what they call Unnikannan, young Krishna. It seems King Martandavarman, when he was the first of the very great emperors of the area that time, when he came to power, he was very young and he had very powerful enemies. And there were enemies who were in 8 different houses, chieftains of 8 houses. They were called Ettu Vittil Pillamar or something like that. And they were always trying to kill this guy and take over the kingdom. And in one such skirmish, Martandavarman he was running ahead and these people were giving him chase. He crossed the river and went across to the other side and he was looking for a place to hide. And he found a cowherd, a young boy, who came and told him, there is this jackfruit tree, this is very huge jackfruit tree, it has a cavity, go and hide there. So Martandavarman the first goes there and he hid himself in that place. And the 8 chieftains came with their supporters and they searched everywhere, couldn't find this guy. So the king survived that day and survived to fight another day, and he, vanquished all those guys and went on to become one of the best kings of Travancore area. So when he became famous, he actually built a temple near this jackfruit tree. And then he worshipped both the tree and the god, Krishna. And this trunk is preserved in that tree today. There are other examples in Manipur. If you go to Manipur, there is the Govindji temple in the capital. And they have built the image of the god with the jackfruit wood grown in a particular area. It seems, the legend says that the god appeared to the king in his dream and said, "Make idols of me from this jackfruit tree." The king forgot conveniently. Later he was defeated by people who came from Burma. He went and fled to Assam and took shelter there. And he finally came back, and then finally he made those images and distributed them to 13 temples. And all those images are preserved in those temples. 12 in Assam, 1 in Bengal, 1 more somewhere else, I forget. So there are examples where old trees are preserved. But you are right, the general tendency is to, we don't have records of anything in this country.
Sir, thank you very much for a very good talk actually. See, I'm an electrical engineer, served this institute for more than 32 years actually. I have a lot of attachment towards the trees because all the power lines were going just below the trees. So with more care and we have taken care and we have replaced all the overhead lines and now all underground cables actually. We have maintained that wherever you enter the main gates, both the gates, the same trees are there. They are not disturbed actually. Till now, behind the director bungalow also, and in front of the main building, they are also not disturbed. I have just one question. There is one tree which is there near the substation 1, old aerospace engineering. That is called Ragi Chettu in Telugu. That is a banyan tree or something. It is touching the building. Till date, we have not disturbed the tree. There is an old belief that the rishis are making tapas just below the trees. How far it is true, sir?
I wouldn't know which tree you're talking about. I don't know the local language.
No, some actually,
but there are many trees which are associated with saints.
Especially these holy trees.
Yes.
Where we worship.
Definitely.
I mean, like, there is an old belief that, rishis are making tapas just below the.
There are trees are associated both with rishis, gurus.
Yeah. I don't know how many gurus are making, rishis are making tapas.
Malevolent spirits, benevolent spirits, all kinds of associations are there. And I commend you for your efforts in preserving the trees on the campus.
I'm Guru Prasad from the Design Department of IISc alumni. I'm thankful, sir, for your absolutely wonderful talk about the history of our trees of India. So, pun intended, history and tree. So, what I wanted to know, sir, there are so many trees which are like kind of becoming endangered, as we saw that loneliest tree and other trees where the next generation of trees are under threat because of a lot of urbanization and all the metro. We have seen a lot of trees being cut. So, is there any, like, there's a global seed bank. So, is there any kind of like Indian seed bank where all this, our tree heritage, vintage trees are protected and preserved for posterity or any kind of thing? One is that. And secondly, I just want to tell that IISc also has streets named like Mahogany Marg and based on the name of the trees itself. So IISc has a very good heritage with connection with trees. We especially have like big banyan tree. Then there is this Western Ghats kind of tree which Professor T.V. Ramchandra has put in front of the mini forest, which is like unique in our thing. So I just wanted to also make a comment that your narrative skills are really great. If you have a YouTube channel and all, it will be more of service for the public.
Yeah.
Of course, your book is very valuable, but for the kids, like, it's so wonderful, like how your narrative story skills are really great, sir. So I would recommend that.
I have a website which will soon come up, and I'll upload many of these things into those. Thank you very much. So, seed bank. Basically, I don't know whether all the trees can perpetuate through seeds. There are trees which have recalcitrant seeds, which seeds may not be suitable for that. Where seeds are suitable, then of course seed banks are good, and usually seeds are stored at -10, -20 degrees, sometimes even much lower temperatures. Liquid nitrogen is a possibility. These days they do it through DNA preservation and tissue culture and so on and so forth. Basically, seed propagation also will not be breeding true. If you have a plus tree or a big tree, the seeds will go through meiosis, and therefore they will segregate, and therefore all the progeny will not be the same as the mother tree. And therefore one has to look at which species it is, whether it is conducive to seed preservation, what sort of progeny it is producing, and so forth. But technologies are available. I'm very glad that you are aware of this and you are taking care of this so well. Thank you. Wonderful, wonderful. Absolutely good.
And I don't know about disease, but a lot of researchers are doing the person.
They're sitting under those, yes. They are one kind of rishis anyway. Great.
Hello, sir. Thank you for your talk. Two very quick questions. One is about the Grand Trunk Road, which Shershah Suri is supposed to have built, right? From Lahore to Dhaka, I think. Today it runs from Calcutta. Anyway, Calcutta to Amritsar. And he's supposed to have planted a lot of trees along that route. And even today, I'm from Punjab, so I see trees along that route. If you can throw some light on the trees on that route. Second is there was something called the Great Indian Hedge, which the British destroyed. If you can throw some light on that.
There is a book on it, actually.
Okay.
On the Great Indian Hedge. Right. I can send you the reference for that, and if you give me your coordinates,
sure,
I'll send you that.
Okay.
I don't know about the Lahore Amritsar thing. I'll have to look into it. I don't know which trees were planted. In many of these areas, eucalyptus was planted earlier. This question was asked to me some 30, 40 years ago. Why they planted eucalyptus there? Because, it's good for camouflaging for military purposes. Eucalyptus has those kind of leaves which are not so green, and you can easily hide things, the roads and the military operations under those. I don't know how far that's true, but I don't know the answer to your question because I have not been to that place specifically. Yeah, sorry.
Sir, my suggestion, I saw many different species around Rajajnagar. While at Corona time, I walked around and on for trees to identify. That time, Amarcia nobilis, the pride of Burma, tree orchid. That tree was 3-4 years, maybe 7 years old, was dead near the veterinary hospital. All the roads are concreted with that. So many trees are in the deadline.
Yes.
Other one, that Arjuna, terminally Arjuna tree, more than 70 years, I think. Now it's suffocating with this concrete. That's every day I saw that seeing these things are horrible to me.
Yes,
And,
there is a Supreme Court ruling that you must have at least 1 meter diameter, radius around the tree base. But implementation, having a judgment is one thing, but implementing has to be done at the local level. Delhi, this is something that Supreme Court castigated the Delhi government more, even as recently as 15-20 days ago, that you are suffocating all the trees to death. If you look at all the gurdwaras, there is a competition to put Italian marble and take them right up to the trees which are planted there. For example, the famous Golden Temple has 3 very ancient bear trees. And though each of them has a history of their own. And they had taken that so close to the root. And secondly, the people who came to pray there used to take that kada prasad and used to wipe their hand on the tree trunk. And then it started choking all the lenticels for breathing, and the tree was getting suffocated, one of the trees. And finally, they enlisted the services of Punjab Agriculture University. Now they have taken away those marbles and they have cordoned off the place. So this is a very common thing, whether in Bangalore or in any other part of India. And I think locally we must take this up and put pressure on, until public feels this is important. The governments of the day will not look into anything. I think that was the example I tried to show through the Dehradun clock tower tree. How passionate are you about preserving you? I think there are very good movements in Bangalore from time to time. I keep reading. They formed a whole human chain when they were constructing something. I think there are very good people here. And I think all of you are doing such great job.
Baobab tree, digitata, Adansonia digitata, 2 trees planted at Prakash Nagar. Some private person in front of their house, nearly 1 meter dia of the trunk base. The opposite one person I asked, that security said 20 years back. But who planted the tree as his own son. While I asked, he said 12 years old. I said about he doesn't know about anything about that tree. 2 trees in our Bangalore.
See, this is the problem, awareness. We don't know what we are cutting away. So if you know, at least somebody will say, oh, don't cut this. So public awareness is the first step in public appreciation of the importance of things. That's all up to us to do this. Thank you.
For the interest of time, I request the question to be short.
Thank you for the talk, sir, and sorry for stretching it for one more question. I just want to know about tree conservation and how it is linked with these iconic trees, because there are these proposals of relocating some trees. So I just want to know, when we talk about the connection of these trees or their historic importance, wouldn't relocating them take away that significance? Is relocation a solution, or is it again a propaganda, or is something better than nothing? What do you think about it?
So most trees or protection comes under the state tree protection acts. Many of these states have a tree protection act, including Karnataka, Gujarat, Maharashtra, everybody. But when it comes to iconic trees or heritage trees or whatever, any name that is connected to them, there is no such thing mentioned in any of the tree protection acts. Nobody looks for special trees in the tree protection act. It's for them a general tree protection act. Now Maharashtra says a heritage tree is a tree which is older than 50 years. Now who is to certify that tree is 49-year-old or 51-year-old? Number one. And they say if you cut that down, you will be fined. And also you have to have compensatory tree planting. If you cut this one tree, you will be asked to plant 20 or 100 or 50, whatever number, somewhere else. So firstly, that's a farce. You don't know who will count the age of the tree or who will determine the age of the tree through which scientific method. Take UP. UP says a heritage tree is one which is 100 years old. So there it is 50. In UP it is 100. So there is nobody is talking to anybody regarding what are heritage trees or iconic trees. First thing is to build a consensus on what do we mean by a heritage tree. Now they say only native trees should be preserved. In Haryana, we should not award or give awards to any tree which is not indigenous tree. Now if it is a heritage tree, how does it matter to you whether it came from Africa or whether it is your tree? Now if a tree is here for 400 years, like Gulmohar, came from Madagascar, 400 years ago when the Portuguese brought it, how many more years should be with you to be considered as your own tree? Now if you look at jacaranda, it originated where? South America. Now if you look at Australia, in I think Queensland, they have a jacaranda day. Florida has a poinciana day, although for Gulmohar, it didn't originate in Florida. So can we not get out of this xenophobia, at least for individual trees? I mean, I agree that there are exotics which could be adventitious. They become weeds, fine. Treat them as for whatever it takes. But individual trees that are absolutely of importance culturally, historically, religiously, whatever, you should have a separate yardstick. So nobody is thinking at all. There is no talk at all about this in India. So this is the problem. First problem is say how do you define this tree? Secondly, tweak your these state tree acts to also include heritage trees. Make tree champions from the civil society who understand this and go around spreading this knowledge. Then bring out these heritage tree registers, digitize them, and every 6 months or 4 months or 1 year, upgrade them depending upon who is nominating, whether they are valid. There are many things you could do, but we have not even started taking the first step. That's my answer to your question. I hope it satisfied. We'll discuss this. I think the time is out. So.
Yeah, so we'll close it for today. Please join us for tea and coffee outside. We thank Dr. Natesh for this wonderful lecture, and I'm sure it has inspired many of us here in the audience.
Thank you very much.
A small token of appreciation for you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.